Hello, hello, and welcome to Digital Marketing This Week. It is episode 50. We're calling this Disliking Programmatic Ads and Eyes. Digital Marketing This Week is brought to you by Seriously Simple Marketing over at seriouslysimplemarketing.com. And of course, my name is Chris Mercer. I am all about analytics and optimization. I am the guy who does most of the content development over at Seriously Simple Marketing, and of course the host of Digital Marketing This Week. And if you ever, as always, see me at a conference or out and about, as many of you did during Digital Marketers The Machine Live event that was in Austin recently, just feel free to yell out Mercer, because I go by Mercer. Keeps it nice and easy. All right, real quick, if you are not already, and you're maybe just listening to this on a podcast or watching this on YouTube or even on the post that we do, Digital Marketing This Week is recorded in a live, kind of in front of a live studio audience. So people can ask questions and have the chat room and all that sort of fun stuff. In order to get the invitations for that, you just need to go to seriouslysimplemarketing.com and you will find a place to sign up for that. And of course, if you are in the live chat, feel free to go ahead and start asking your questions. And we normally answer those after the official part of the show is over. And then we can do that. So let's go ahead and get started without further ado. So the very first thing we wanted to chat about is Marketing Land's article on Facebook's new empathy button and if it's going to be good news for marketers. Now, you may have seen, in fact, pretty quickly on, they talk about the idea of a dislike button, and that's kind of what a lot of people did. They were like, oh, they took this article when it came out, or not this particular article, but this concept where Mark Zuckerberg said, hey, we want to be able to give people a way to say, hey, I don't necessarily like this, but like I acknowledge it. So when somebody says their pet died, you don't want to be like, I like that your little puppy died. Like, I like that. You want to be able to say, hey, I acknowledge, I'm sorry for your loss, whatever, and show some empathy without showing a positive like. So the whole article basically took a bunch of different marketing individuals and sort of asked them what they thought. Our opinion is kind of the same with what most of these were, which is basically, number one, who knows? There's no idea. You have no idea. You haven't even seen this thing yet, so how can you have an opinion on it? That's kind of my personal opinion. However, let's pretend for a second that it was something that was about empathy. Then I would go along with what most of these other marketers are saying, which is like, probably not going to have that much of an impact. And the reason that we wanted it here is just so that you're familiar with Facebook and that they're doing this. And of course, most of us in direct response marketing, Facebook is one of those huge, huge traffic sources, and there's a lot of stuff that goes through there. So I want to make sure that we're aware of what's happening. But this thing, I just don't feel it's going to have a big, giant impact. I think it'll be this empathy button that's maybe done for personal posts, but brands probably won't have an empathy button, because what are the bad news that brands are going to promote, right? Like, why would a brand ever say something bad where people would want to acknowledge but not necessarily like? Like, I just don't see it happening. So if this thing comes out, and I believe it will, it's probably just going to be for personal. I don't see it affecting brands at all. I don't even think it's going to be available to brands. But the only thing is it could be something that eventually leads to people being able to express other emotions. Who knows? And so maybe you can, that stuff sort of ties in. But overall, this is more of those like, tuck this away as something that Facebook's playing around with. I don't think you need to do anything on it immediately. On to more tactical oriented, we had one from thenextweb.com, and this is all about neuroscience and psychology. And as always with digital marketing this week, we want to do some things that keep you up to date on what the industry is doing, so you can be familiar with some of that and keep up to date with the different terms, then the latest and greatest. But we also want to give you some tactics, something that you can listen to the show or participate in and then start taking actionable actions on, right? So this particular article I thought was really good. Again, it's on the Next Web, and we'll have links to all of these in the show notes, of course, as we always do. And we always encourage people to go and read the actual articles because we can't possibly cover all the details here. But to highlight, they basically talk about 5 reasons why people are sharing on social media, and I do want to cover those. So the very first one is they talk about the need that people want to share, right? They want to share it so they can entertain, inspire, and be useful. And the way that you think about this is, what is your content doing that can help people entertain, inspire, or be useful to others? And if it does that, there's a possible reason people would want to share. Another reason they talked about was to express who they really are. So does your content help them express who they really are? Right? A lot of political content, stuff like that can be shared for those reasons. To nurture relationships, right? To help somebody along. So nurturing relationships, does your content help to establish this community that they're maybe a part of? To feel more involved, right? And I think this kind of goes along with establishing relationships and nurturing relationships, but to be more involved. Does it feel like, are you giving them an option to share, to be part of a club, right? So a lot of multi-level marketing might take advantage of that sort of thing. Like, here's this thing you got to share, and you share it with this specific little Facebook group, and kind of get some activity there. And then finally, it was to get the word out about specific causes. So this is the altruism sort of thing, just for the ice bucket challenge, right? Would be kind of an obvious top of mind reference. So people dump ice water on their heads and they're sharing that, and they're doing it to be part of a specific cause, but they're also, or at least some people were doing it to nurture their community, right? Maybe they had a little company and they were sharing it within their company, that everybody was doing this. Others were doing it to just kind of be part of the cool kids, be part of the crowd, and they were doing it for that. So that had 5, pretty much across the board. You can choose all 4, like people that were expressing who they really are, like, hey, I'm a wild and crazy type of person who's going to dump water over my head. Like, that's a reason that people were sharing. And so what happened is, I think that particular campaign hit all 5 of these. And even if one person would only share for one of these particular reasons, the fact that all 5 of these reasons were being hit, more people are open to sharing. And that's sort of what helps things go viral. So that was really interesting. Again, it's on the next web, and we will have a link on the show notes. But those 5 reasons I thought were pretty interesting. Let's talk about another interesting tactic, and this is from the Daily Egg, which is the blog that Crazy Egg does, and this is about eye movements. Now, when I first saw this, I was kind of like, oh, eye movements, because there's this thing in conversions where eye movement tracking is established to show wherever the eyes go is kind of where the attention is, and therefore you can help conversions by adjusting where the eyes go. And I think for the most part, that's been fairly debunked, that that's not really a thing. There is no real connection, and there is in terms of attention, but just because the eyes are darting around, who really knows. But this was interesting. And this was interesting because for me, personally, I used to teach speed reading. And believe it or not, eye movements come into speed reading. If you've ever taken a speed reading course, eye movements are a big thing they talk about. So here's what this basically says. And I'm going to summarize this, but there is a lot of details, and they go into a lot of science, which I thought was kind of cool. Especially because it's written for marketers, right? But to think about your pages in terms of how you're doing your pages and your design, they basically said, listen, there's 2 different ways your eyes move. They kind of have this nice smooth tracking where, like, if you're looking at a plane in the sky, right, it's a smooth tracking. And then they've got that jittery sort of bouncing back and forth where you look at different things and you put all these different puzzle pieces together in your brain to figure out what the picture is that you're seeing. So when you're reading, that's kind of the jittery thing. So what happens is your eyes are, 7 to 8 times per line. Your eyes are bouncing around 7 to 8 times. There's different, the saccades, they call them, I believe is the scientific term, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But you basically pick up a little bit of information, maybe it's a word or 2, then you bounce around the page a little bit, then you pick up another little bit on that line, and you add another word or 2, and you bounce around a page a little bit, and you pick up another couple of words on that same line you're trying to read, and you bounce around the page a little bit, and eventually you hit the end of the line, and your brain's basically putting together these little teeny puzzle pieces of data that it's getting. And that's how you read. That's how most people read. And so when speed reading came about, most of it uses some sort of visual cue where you might take a pen and drag it across the line, or your finger and drag it across the line, because when you do that, it helps fixate your eyes so that they're going across the line in the page, and you're picking up, instead of 1 or 2 words, maybe picking up 3 or 4 words. And that bouncing back and forth stuff doesn't happen as often. Now, how does this relate to conversions and marketing? Well, in this article, they talked about that pattern, and they talked about specifically about how when you're reading, you are doing that, right? But then they said, okay, well, let's apply that to a page. And I'm going to bring up an example here for the video, but again, you can see this in the show notes. But essentially, what this example is you've got a page, and they basically took Reddit, right? You look at Reddit, you load up Reddit, or a forum in general, any sort of forum. There's like a million things everywhere that you can click on. Some e-commerce sites are like this. There's things everywhere. So your eye's constantly bouncing around. It doesn't know where to go. There isn't an obvious spot for it to go. And what they basically did is they contrasted that to like a Facebook interface. So you go to Facebook, what happens? Upper right-hand corner, you see notifications, right? Now, why do you see that? Number one, because it's red. You've got the little number there that shows the notifications that are there. You also see it because it's high contrast, right? Because it's on a blue background, and you've got the little white with the red number on there. So it's easy to see. It's obvious that your eyes sort of want to go there, right? And that's where I thought this was pretty interesting. So in terms of conversions, what could you do with this? Well, think about when you're looking at your page, how often, like how are your eyes bouncing around? And do they need to bounce around a lot to kind of piece together what this page is trying to do? And if they do, or if there's lots of different parts that they can play with, try simplifying. Try simplifying. So taking a page, we have a big rule here, which is one page, right? One page one purpose. That's it. One page, one purpose. So take your page, take your lander, try to figure out, okay, what's the best way to use this? And if it's to get a registration, then great. Go for that. Go for that. Make it a squeeze page and get your opt-in form. And that's what it's really trying to do. Everything that it does is to get an opt-in. If it's to get a sale, then everything it does is to get a sale. Because when you do that, and especially if you're simplifying your message, you don't have graphics, and this is incidentally why they talk about the wall of text option, where you hear people from a design standpoint, it's a big giant paragraph of text. People skip past that because there's like a million little things that they have to think, because words are pictures, letters are pictures. That's how we understand them. So when you're doing a big giant wall of text, people will just skip right past it. You have to break that stuff up with images and bullet points, and that's how, from a design perspective, you can make it a lot simpler to understand and to integrate, right, and to actually read and participate in. And when you do that, then your message is more likely, all that copywriting money that you've been spending to that copywriter to get them to write really great copy, well, if you put it in a big giant wall of text, it's not going to work that well because everyone's going to skip it. They're not going to absorb it. But when you put it in with bullet points and some images and you direct the eye and you make it a nice, simple, easy to digest message, then that exact same messaging, all these exact same words, because they're laid out differently, will give you a completely different result. So that's kind of where we thought that was a really interesting article. And just thinking about it in terms of your own conversions, look at your pages and just see, are there big giant chunks of text? Are there things where maybe you could lay them out or do some bullet points that will call out the most important parts to make it easy to digest and to absorb and to engage with your message? Because when they do that, you're more likely to actually move them through your conversion funnel. Next up, let's talk about programmatic advertising. Ooh, there's a fancy word. So this is something you're going to hear more and more about. We've been hearing about this for months, a little while now, but now you're starting to see people in masterminds that are coming back talking about programmatic advertising. And at the end of the day, programmatic advertising is, at least as of now, right? As of now, it's a fairly brand-oriented thing because it takes a ton of money to do this right. And essentially what this is retargeting on the steroids. That's all it really is. It's just a super fancy, very high-level form of retargeting. And for those not familiar, retargeting is basically where you might do a cart abandonment, where they come to your cart and they fill it out, but they don't actually pay for it, and they leave. Well, you can retarget those people on Facebook or AdWords or any other ad platform practically out there, and you can ask them to come back. Hey, did life get in the way? Did you want to go ahead and take advantage of this now? Here's a 20% coupon, to take advantage of it. And that's where those ads come from. Those are retargeting ads. So what programmatic advertising is basically that. It is retargeting, but it's retargeting on such a micro level that they are tracking everything they possibly can. And that's really all this is. And the reason that we put this here, again, this kind of goes over the, not so much anything you can do with this right now, but you should be aware of it from a marketer's perspective, just from an industry perspective, what this is. So when you hear about it, just think, okay, they're talking about retargeting. That's really all it is. And in this particular article by DoubleClick, again, all in the show notes, you'll find all of these. You can see how these big giant brands are kind of taking advantage of this, but they're basically saying like, hey, people that bought these high-end products, we showed them other ads for high-end products and we retargeted them, and it led to an improvement, and we're calling it programmatic advertising. Like it's not really that complicated overall. Now, programmatic advertising, I think as a science, is actually complicated. I've talked to a couple of people who do this, and they're way into this. They are data analysts. They are super numbers geeks, and they have budgets that are in the millions. So when it comes to ad spend, so it's highly unlikely that most direct response marketers will play with this, but you probably already are if you're doing retargeting. That's really all it is. So if somebody says, hey, we're taking advantage of programmatic advertising, start with telling them about your retargeting campaign, and that can at least help you out a little bit. And again, programmatic advertising is really just going down to minute details and doing retargeting to a whole new niche level. That's really all it is. That's the best way, I think, to explain it. So that's all I wanted to talk to you about that, let you know to be aware of programmatic advertising. That's really all it comes down to. And finally, before we end today's episode, let's talk about the Facebook Ad Manager. Now, Social Media Examiner did a great article on this, so I will let them do the heavy lifting and put this in the show notes. But to cover the overall concept here, if you've not been in your ads manager recently, if you tried to do Facebook ads and it was just too confusing to figure out where stuff is, well, they've completely changed it. So take a look to go back in. Now, many of us have already seen these changes, especially if you're using Ads Manager all the time. But I thought this article was great because it goes through the exact changes that they sort of did and breaks down with lots of nice little pictures. Here's where navigation is now. If you're trying to figure out where your tools report is, here's where, or your different reporting is, here's where it is. If you're trying to figure out how to change the date, here's where that is. And what's really nice about this is even if you have used Ads Manager quite a bit, but just not quite sure where everything is now, and you're constantly trying to figure out how to go back and figure it out, this article is a great cheat sheet. Again, lots of images that sort of show like, hey, here's how to do this. So I would take a look at that. And again, that's what Social Media Examiner has that article, and again, we'll put that in the show notes as well. But the 30,000 foot view on that article is Facebook Ads Manager is completely changed. Not a little change, completely changed. So if you've not been in there for a little while, jump in there, take a look, get familiar with the new interface. Hopefully you will find it a little bit more user-friendly, and of course, Facebook would like you to spend more money with them if you do. All right. So with that, I think that's all we really had for this particular episode. Thank you again for joining us for Digital Marketing This Week, episode number 50, Disliking Programmatic Ads and Eyes.